all I'm going to do essentially is a quick look at the programs that we've had so far. And the theme, as many of you guys know, is confronting comfort and what we give up and what we gain by living in cities. So essentially what you're going to see is in the moment, still calculations of the way we have perceived and thought about our public programs. I will tell you that we resisted the temptation to have, say, a mashed potato bar in here every night. So many different ideas that were actually thought through by our lab team and ourselves. But I am going to do just the quick back of the envelope calculations of how many visitors we have had here to date. What you see on the screen is 50,983. If we look at how many public programs we've put together, now please keep in mind this is with our lab team, with the amazing crew that we have here, the huge amount of support from our community as well. 189 programs in 55 days. I put an asterisk there because we actually had so many more programs that weren't listed on our website. The amount of screenings that we had here in the lab, 31. Including many that had Q&A and discussions afterwards. The very first screening that we did here was called Blank City. We talked a little bit about this earlier today, but we felt that it was so important to deliberately show this film on the first night in the lab because it looked at the history of creativity and the long, amazing lengths that people would take to live in this city to make art and no-wave film. I should add that we had quite a few films in which the audience would be facing each other. So there were moments where you would actually see the audience on both sides. We had films where people sometimes would emote and cry, and you would see the audience on both sides, and you would see each other crying. You would not be able to hide in this darkened theater space, but you actually were confronting an audience and confronting other people's emotions. We are still playing or understanding about how this space functions as a public space. Lectures. We had a fair amount of lectures. Originally, we thought we may not have any lectures in this space, but we ended up having a long line of artists. We had architects. We had a lot of our advisory committee members, writers, and the series that I wanted to just talk a little bit about is the Comfort series. We had our architects of this space who had come and given a talk on both the second day of the lab and then also in September, but looking or challenging the assumptions that we make about in physical spaces. Elizabeth Diller, and she's someone from our advisory committee, and she talked about comfort in the city. Saskia Skassen, and she talked about hacking the city. Gabrielle Hamilton, who has a restaurant across the street, gave a shocking reading of her book, Blood, Bones, and Butter, and she relayed some of the stories that she had of opening in the neighborhood and the rat infestation that's sort of been a symbol of confronting our own comfort as we've been thinking about programs here in this space. David Simon, writer of The Wire, came here and also gave an amazing talk about education and what we also do here in New York and how it's so different than the rest of the country and what they face. All of our public programs, the highlights of them, we can see clippets online. And I'm still doing like survey says number 58 lectures were the number of lectures that we had here. Tours that we had all around the city, and we mentioned some of these earlier today as well. Some folks that went into the Meadowlands, we went up to the Bronx River. We had the testing tours, which we've done a huge amount of wrap-up and analysis this afternoon. And then two of our amazing volunteers who had been with us since the beginning to try and think through the way that we move through cities, but also if we can gather some kind of biological feedback or stress and measure how we move through the city and the built environment. Walking tours, keep in mind this is over 55 days. We had 21 different walking tours. And workshops, and that was something that I think is one of the biggest surprises we had in the lab, that to actually be able to have tables and chairs and be able to have people to sit through and diagram and argue face to face. I rarely saw people with laptops in front of them. I saw very few people sitting and disengaging. It was, in my experience, one of the most analog places I've ever seen people in dialogue. We had Spurs, who actually gave a wonderful conclusion this afternoon, and you can sort of see the different configurations of tables that we would have. we had 47 workshops over the past 55 days. And then lab events. This is something that I would call in the category of other, and it goes under special events on our website. These were some of the discussions that we had following different screenings. We had 2 events where participants were asked to eat solidified water as a comment on the scarcity of water and potability of water around the world. We had a few listening events, and this one was one of my favorite, where we asked people to wear eye masks, and then we had a musician doing these different types of gongs, and it was a way of kind of cleansing, I'd say, for those who were in the audience. We had yoga, we had meditation, and a whole host of other events. And I actually think that the asterisks should be there, because even the way that we switched over the furniture almost became another public program. So in the final count, 189, and I'm just going to leave you all with this one. This is a shot from Wall Street. It was one of the tours we did on Wednesday, and if Charles Montgomery is our lab team member who had been leading us in that group, you can see that they are essentially gathering. We gathered underneath this sculpture, and this is now just going into a metaphor of what it's like to have a museum space that exists on the very fringe of practice. It was one of the few times, I think, that we found ourselves under a sculpture or under an artwork, quote unquote, and had this moment of looking at the world or looking what else was happening in New York City, and suddenly realizing how far we'd come and how much we were actually thinking through things that are very much alive and present here. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.